Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis. I'm here with Nina Rosner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connection so you can have a thriving marriage. Today, our topic is what to say when privilege meets suffering. All right. So I read a quote by Jack Handy that says, before you criticize someone, walk a mile in their shoes. That way you will be a mile from them and then you'll have their shoes.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about empathy and how important that is in relationships and how, we need to be careful with each other and hold space for each other. And usually we do that pretty well until we ourselves have to actually go through the same thing that that person is walking through. And I think at that point is when the light bulb really goes off for us. And so before that happens is the conversation today. It's the what to say when there's a gap, when there's empathy there, but there's not real understanding there. And the what to say when you're facing that gap. So Nina, welcome. I'm sure that you've been in this situation, or I've heard clients that have been in this situation explain frustration around just that lack of understanding when they're suffering in a way that maybe they feel like no one gets it and they're all alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes it's, their own creation, right?
Yeah.
That's when I find it hard to have empathy, is people that create their own problem and then complain about it. I'm like, really? And that's hard. That's an opportunity for me because the Holy Spirit is not ruling my heart with compassion in that space. And part of that, I think, is I'm a big fan of personal responsibility and accountability and all of that. And so I have a hard time understanding some of those things, but that's on me. What's true is, we judge because of lack of understanding. And one of the questions that the Lord's really kind of yanked me around with in a loving way is, there but for the grace of God go you.
Yeah.
How do you know? I used to, this is going to sound really terrible to admit this, but it's probably the biggest area of my life where I've seen dramatic change. I grew up around Native American reservations. Okay. So in Montana. And I moved to Cincinnati, and there's areas of Cincinnati that have poverty. And I heard a lot of judgment from people in town growing up about people that lived on the res, right? So a lot of condemnation, a lot of judgment. And so I didn't understand that, some of those people are doing their absolute best, and the impact that culture has on keeping people stuck. Like, that is a reality that a lot of people do not understand. And it is hard to pull yourself up out of a culture that is so steeped in certain mindsets and so beaten down. It is really difficult to decide to be something other than what you're around. Like, salmon don't swim against other salmon. They swim against the water, and they do it together. Like, everybody can do something hard if they're all doing it together. But when we're looking at other people and lacking empathy, it is always because we don't fully understand. Any kind of judgment I have, the Bible is pretty clear. The Son of Man himself, Jesus Christ himself, did not come to judge. And we're not to do that. And as we judge, we will be judged. Like, it's pretty doggone clear that we're not supposed to do that. And yet we do. And 100% of the time when I've done that, and when I do it, the question is, okay, what is it about me that's so prideful that thinks I have the right to sit on God's throne and levy judgment against that? It's a lack of understanding, plain and simple.
Absolutely. And I think if I could just use the word ignorant, because that feels like the most accurate way of putting this, there's like a true ignorance
Yeah.
to the plight of someone else and the cross that God has given them to carry.
Hmm.
And I think I think in an effort sometimes to even the playing field or treat us all as equal, we assume that we can pick up our britches and, just do better or rise up higher. And the reality is sometimes they're starting 10 steps behind the starting line.
Yeah.
And there isn't an even playing field and they have to catch up before
Hmm.
they can even begin. And so um I often wonder whether it's in a marriage or at work or you're dealing with politics or race type situations, how to close that gap of ignorance. What is the what to say that we can bring to the
Hmm.
conversation to help each other,
Yeah.
because, it may not be that it's a poverty situation. It may just be access. It may be
Hmm.
you're not in the right rooms with the right people. It may be, you don't have the right pedigree, education wise, and that limits you. It just can be in so many different situations. And so that's what we want to talk about today is
Hmm.
how can we help each other? What is the what to say when maybe you're in a situation where there's privilege you're speaking to and you're the one that is at a disadvantage, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's a super hard question because it taps into people that are in relationships that, are being abused, where there's physical dominance, where there's emotional, financial, whatever dominance, and they don't have support. Their climate, their culture that they live in is one of you're less than. And so
Mhm.
being able to influence upward is really, really hard. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter if you're in a company, it doesn't matter if you're in a family. Like I was in a company for a couple of years where the plant manager was abusive, like physically abusive. He would grab people, he would throw things. Like he was terrifying. And I
Mm.
stood up to him a couple of times because I didn't care if I kept my job or not. I was married, my husband had a nice income, like privileged place to be for sure. Um,
Mhm.
but I stood up to him, and the guy ended up losing his job eventually. I stood up to him and was part of that. But it was really hard. Like it took everybody gathering together and going on strike. Basically, I wasn't invited because I hadn't been there long enough. Nobody knew where I would stand with that. But the whole engineering department went on strike basically and told the CEO, "We're not working another day until you get rid of him." And so 15 people in your company saying no more, that'll be a thing. Well, what that equates to is, and it's the same thing. It's how do you deal with bullies, you know?
Mhm.
So you have this scale. You have on one end, there's this bully, right? Maybe it's severe privilege, dominance, whatever the word is there.
Mhm.
And then over here, on the other end of the scale, you have this situation where it's just misunderstanding, right? And you've
Mhm.
got healthiness over here.
Mhm.
So somewhere in between is the space where people need to start leveling up. And it is absolutely nearly impossible for
Mhm.
people who are living in that climate where they're verbally told negative things about who they are on a daily basis, where they're criticized, nitpicked to death. It's really hard for them to discover that they have a voice and to exercise it. They've
Mhm.
When the research shows that when you live in an environment like that long enough, it sucks the ever loving life out of you. The Bible verse is around a crushed spirit, who can bear,
Mm.
you know,
Mhm.
who can live, and people can't. And so what do you need? You need support. So, and that's one of the reasons that our strength and dignity course exists. And that's where it came from is, recognizing that there were women out there in these relationships where they were suicidal, they were depressed, they'd lost their hope, and they're living in these situations. And part of the problem is some of them created those because they were over serving,
Mhm.
right? And they
Mhm.
were throwing themselves under the bus and creating an atmosphere where their spouse disrespected them because they were acting pathetically. That's part of it. But not all of it, not for everybody, but some did that. Okay. And then you have this thing where they're just naturally, out of the goodness of their heart, serving, trying to do their best, and they're getting taken advantage of by somebody who's selfish and doesn't see that.
Mhm.
And so what do you do in that circumstance? Well, you know what? You start conflict, but you
Mhm.
can't do that in a vacuum. You need a support system. If your goal is to change the atmosphere and create a culture that's loving and beautiful, you need to be able to level up, which means find your identity in Christ and then step into that and call that person to a higher level of being as well, but not from a standpoint of arrogance, but from a standpoint of being grounded in the truth of the word and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit motivating, moving you in the moments. Yeah, it's really difficult. So the what to say, I think the first question for somebody in that situation is, Lord, what do I do? Where do I go? Who will help me? What do you want me to do? And he will send people. He will reveal opportunities,
Mhm.
and he'll bring the information. The scriptures will take on a different meaning once you have the awareness that what you're doing isn't biblical, because when you've got a situation that's unbalanced like that, the other person isn't walking in the way. They're not walking in the spirit. And so endorsing that just creates more of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, so what I'm hearing is you have to create conflict in order to increase the awareness. Because sometimes the ignorance is unintentional,
Mhm.
but then sometimes there's just a lack of concern for
Mhm.
others' well-being. And I think it's important to know the difference because, I've been in a situations where I've been empathetic, but still ignorant
Mhm.
to someone else's, suffering. And to your point earlier, if not for the grace of God, there go I. God has, often allowed me to walk through some things that, have enlightened me in a more accurate way. And that's hard too, but I also think that's another way of confronting, you know,
Mhm.
confronting that same issue. So I don't know if you remember the show Wife Swap, where um two families, it doesn't play anymore. This was probably 5 or 10 years ago, but it was a reality show that used to play, I think, on ABC or NBC, one of the major networks, where they would take two families with two totally different setups, one country, one city, one stay-at-home mom, one, career mom, or vice versa. And they would swap. And it was always interesting to me how in the beginning everyone was excited about the experience because they felt like their cross was heavier or their burden was heavier, and they were going to get a break when they got to switch spouses. But inevitably, episode after episode, at the very end, they were always so grateful for going back to their own spouses because they had completely assumed the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And I think it was a great demonstration of the ignorance that happens when we
Mhm.
look over to our neighbor's yard and we think they have it easier, or our burden is heavier.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, why that is, but that's something that we just do automatically. And I, unfortunately, like I said, have been humbled in that space, but I also think that when we have a strong identity, like you said, there's also opportunity to confront that. And
Mhm.
so I think that's the takeaway today is not to be afraid to walk into those spaces where there is opportunity to shed light.
Yeah, and I want to clarify what it means to start conflict, because I don't want anybody, going, okay, I'm gonna like go tell
Start
you what
fighting.
you're wrong because like that's just certainly not going to go well. The formula for communicating in a situation like this is to affirm the relationship first. Hey, I love you.
Mhm.
And communicate intent. I really want us to have a great relationship. And then remind the person of who they are. And, it's not like you to, yell at the kids at dinner like that. And then ask a question. So what's up with you? What's going on? And that opens a door where validation can then occur for whatever it is that that person's experiencing.
Mhm.
And if we, as our last episode, if we haven't beat this horse to death, if we can't validate, then we're triggered. So there's other work to do there. But, that's really the secret sauce. And it's no effort when you have been healed, when you're walking in the way of the Spirit, when you're love, when you are in that, you don't even notice that you're doing this. It's
Yeah.
easy. It's really, really easy. We make things really hard for ourselves when we think of ourselves, when we're selfish. And it doesn't matter if we're right. It's if we're feeling that, we take those feelings to God, and then we can listen to his truth around it. And his truth is always, you know what? Share in the sufferings of Christ, weather this well, suffer well. And by the way, you don't have any boundaries in this area. So how about we talk about that? Because there's things we're doing that contribute to that.
Mm.
And so we need to level up in some spaces too, but we also need to suffer well. You know, this isn't some, yacht party. Like
Darn.
the world is gonna hate us. We're Christian. I mean, that's pretty clear in the Bible.
Mhm.
So we have to understand that, and then we have to deal with that well. It's a sign of maturity to suffer well.
Yeah.
And in that suffering, um, we can still have influence, but we can't do it when we're emotional. We need to work through that first, then get God's perspective around it, and then go interact in our circumstances the way he'd have us do that.
Yeah. Is there anything for the person on the side of privilege to do? Because, I'm hearing that sometimes we play a part in our suffering, that we should, be careful about entering in and how we enter in, but don't hesitate to enter into
Mhm.
the challenging conversations. But, um, if you're the one that is ignorant or lacking
Mhm.
awareness, is there something on that side for us to do?
Yeah, stop being stupid. Like,
Okay.
sorry, that I couldn't resist. You walked right into that. No, here's the hard reality around that. Sometimes it's ignorance because of just culture and cluelessness, right?
Mhm.
um I know that was a thing for me. I wasn't intentionally being selfish around some of the attitudes that I held around poverty. I was ignorant. There's a difference. But the point of that was that, once I saw that I was wrong, it was like you admit that you're wrong. And the point is that a lot of people just aren't humble enough to do that. So
Mhm.
when you're in a space of, holding the upper hand or whatever that is, privilege, authority, whatever, leadership, uh, the best question you can be asking yourself is, what is it that I don't see? Could I be wrong? You know, am I being selfish? Because if you're asking yourself and the Lord those questions, the odds of you actually being a narcissist are pretty small. Where can I be giving? Where am I selfish, Lord? Show me my sin.
Mhm.
And being open to the Lord's correction, that's normal Christian living. He corrects those he loves. And so if we're not doing that, if that's not part of our regular ebb and flow of our relationship with him, then that's on us. And the
Mhm.
hard thing is that when you have people that have a habit of behaving that way, lots of boundaries. Uh, we have a pastor in a local church. He calls it guns and lawyers. Like I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's hard, but it's dealing with the fool.
Yeah.
You know, when we're operating in a space of foolishness, which is that's what that is. You know, it takes hard boundaries, stiff neckedness. Um, sometimes, a lot of times, you can't deal with it. It just is the way it is, and people are left to navigate that the best they can, which usually means lots of boundaries. It's unfortunate, but you can't connect with that because there's no empathy and
Mhm.
no reciprocity. It's very selfish,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is a shame.
Definitely. All right. Well, lots of tips today. What will you do with the information you have? We invite you to check out our website, greaterimpact.org. We have a free PDF called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We think you'll enjoy that. We also have a couple of e-courses you can sign up for, as well as other episodes on this channel for you to also learn more about what we do. And if you really like it, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and you'll get the episodes as they air. Thank you for joining today, and we will see you next time.